What kind of man hears a child screaming from the earth and keeps walking? Jack Turner had asked himself that question once before, years ago, standing on the side of a frozen highway, staring at twisted metal and red and blue lights reflecting off the snow. He had not answered it then. He had simply survived it. Since that night, life had narrowed into something smaller, quieter, safer. Pain could not reach him if he stayed alone long enough. That was the logic he lived by now, up here in the Montana wilderness, where the land was harsh, honest, and empty enough to match what was left inside him. The mountains did not care that Emily and Grace were gone. The wind did not soften its voice because his wife and daughter would never hear it again. Jack liked that. Nature asked nothing from him except awareness. He rode the perimeter of his land most mornings with Ranger, his quarter horse moving steadily beneath him. The world reduced to tracks in the dirt, weather shifts, and the slow passage of time. The wedding ring hung on a chain against his chest, cold even in summer. He never took it off. It reminded him who he used to be and why he stayed this way. That morning had begun like any other. A low sky, the smell of pine and damp soil, the distant warning of a storm that might never arrive. Jack was checking an old stretch of forest where abandoned mining shafts and wells dotted the land like forgotten wounds. Locals avoided the area. Too many accidents. Too many stories. Jack knew where most of them were, had marked them years ago, but erosion had a way of undoing even careful men. He was about to turn Ranger back toward the ranch when the sound reached him. Thin, broken, almost swallowed by the wind. At first, he thought it was an animal. A fox, maybe. Or the echo of something old, carried wrong. He waited, listening, the way survival had taught him to do. Then it came again, a child's cry. Jack froze. His hand tightened on the reins, his breath catching before he could stop it. The sound was weak, frightened, but unmistakably human. A girl's voice, young. Too young to be out here. Too young to be real. His first instinct was denial. Sound traveled strangely in the mountains. Echoes bent, memories lied. He told himself it was nothing, that chasing ghosts had never saved anyone. He turned Ranger a half step away. The cry came again, sharper now, closer. Jack swung down from the saddle before he had time to think. His boots hit the ground hard. He followed the sound through brush and rock until he saw it. A ring of broken stone half hidden by weeds. The earth caved inward around a narrow black opening. An old well. One he did not remember marking. He approached the edge slowly, every muscle tight. The air around the opening was colder, damp. He knelt, braced himself, and looked down. A small face stared back up at him from the dark. She was wedged against one side, knees bent awkwardly, clothes soaked with mud. Dirt streaked her cheeks, her hair tangled and matted. Her eyes were wide, bright with fear, but she wasn't screaming now. She was watching him, as if trying to decide whether he was real or another disappointment. "Hey," Jack said, his voice rough from disuse. "I've got you." The girl swallowed. "I fell," she said quietly. "I tried to be careful." The words hit him harder than the cry had. There was no panic in her voice, only effort. Like she had already spent what fear she could afford. Jack scanned her quickly. Scraped knees, raw hands, a shiver running through her small frame. Hypothermia wasn't far off. He told her his name, though he didn't know why. Asked hers. "Lily," she said. "Lily Wright." He anchored his rope to a nearby tree, testing it twice, then lowered it down. "You hold on tight," he said. "I'm going to pull you up. It's going to hurt a little, but you won't fall, I promise." She nodded once, trusted him immediately. That too hurt. When he hauled her out, her weight was almost nothing, but it felt like lifting the past out of the ground with her. She collapsed against him as soon as her feet touched solid earth, her body shaking violently now that she was safe. Jack wrapped his jacket around her without thinking, holding her until the tremors eased. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The forest pressed in around them, quiet again, as if it had never screamed at all. Then Lily looked up at him, her expression solemn in a way no 6-year-old should be. She studied his face, the lines carved there by weather and loss, the emptiness he no longer bothered to hide. "You need a wife," she said. Jack stiffened. "And I need a dad." The words landed clean and deep, no hesitation, no softness to blunt them. Jack felt something shift in his chest. A fracture he hadn't known was still possible. He pulled back slightly, searching her face for playfulness, confusion, anything that would make the statement harmless. There was nothing. "My mom says people are broken when they're alone too long," Lily added. "She says it makes the bad things louder." Jack looked away, toward the trees, toward the long stretch of life he had built around silence. He had not cried since the funeral. He did not intend to start now. "What's your mom's name?" he asked instead. "Maria," Lily said. "She told me to run." The simple explanation carried weight. Too much weight. Lily explained in pieces, as children do. They had been camping, hiding. Her dad was coming. He always came. Maria hurt her ankle. Told Lily to keep going. Lily ran. She fell. Jack listened without interrupting, every word tightening the coil inside him. He knew men like that. He knew what fear looked like when it learned to stay quiet. He lifted Lily onto Ranger's saddle, adjusting the stirrups so she could sit safely. She held the horn with both hands, her small body leaning instinctively into the horse's warmth. Jack led them back toward the ranch, his thoughts racing ahead into territory he had sworn never to enter again. He told himself he was only taking her somewhere warm, only until the sheriff could be called, only until things were sorted out. But the land had already decided otherwise. Behind them, unseen, the abandoned well sat open and empty, the echo of Lily's cry fading into the ground. Ahead, the path narrowed, pulling Jack Turner back into a life he had buried with the dead, whether he was ready for it or not. Jack did not sleep that night. Lily did, curled on the couch with Ranger's blanket pulled up to her chin, one small hand still gripping the sleeve of his shirt until exhaustion finally claimed her. He let her keep it. The house had been quiet for years, but this was different. This silence breathed. It shifted. It watched him back. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the dark window where his reflection hovered like a stranger. He told himself he would call the sheriff at first light. That was the responsible thing. The lawful thing. But responsibility had never prepared him for the look in Lily's eyes when she spoke about her mother, or the calm certainty with which she described a man who hunted them like prey. At dawn, Lily woke before he did. She padded into the kitchen barefoot, wrapped in the blanket, her hair sticking up in uneven directions. She didn't ask where she was. She didn't ask who he was again. She simply climbed into the chair across from him and waited, as if this had always been the arrangement. "My dad will come," she said. Jack nodded. "I know. He always does," she added. "He doesn't like being told no." Jack kept his voice even. "Is he looking for you right now?" She nodded once. "For Mom more." That settled something inside him. Not courage, not anger. Something colder, more deliberate. After breakfast, Jack saddled Ranger and lifted Lily up again, this time letting her hold the reins while he walked beside them. She liked that. He could tell. It gave her control. Halfway down the trail, she started talking. Not all at once, but steadily, as if the words had been waiting for permission. They had moved a lot. Cheap motels, campsites, long nights in the car with the lights off. Her father, Richard Wright, always found them eventually. Sometimes with apologies, sometimes with fists, always with rules. Lily learned early when to be quiet, when to disappear. Maria taught her how to read tracks, how to stay downwind, how to hide fear behind obedience. That, too, hurt Jack to hear. When they reached the clearing where the campsite had been, Lily fell silent. The place was wrong. Too empty. The tent gone. Supplies scattered. Jack dismounted and scanned the ground slowly, methodically, the way he always did when something mattered. Footprints. Too many. Heavy boots. Fresh enough. Drag marks near the tree line. A streak of darkened dirt that wasn't dirt at all. Jack's jaw tightened. Your mom hurt her ankle here. Yes, Lily whispered. She said to go. I didn't want to. Jack stood, already knowing the answer to the question he hadn't asked. Did she go with him? Lily shook her head. He took her. Jack exhaled slowly, the sound barely controlled. The law would say, report it. Wait. Let the system work. The land said something else entirely. Back at the ranch, he radioed Sheriff Tom Reynolds, gave him the facts, the names, the location. Reynolds listened, then said what Jack expected him to say. Warrants took time. Proof took time. Men like Richard Wright didn't. I'll put patrols on the roads, Reynolds said. But Jack, don't do anything stupid. Jack didn't answer. He wasn't sure what counted anymore. That afternoon, Lily followed him everywhere. She stayed close without asking to, a small shadow that refused to detach. When he checked the perimeter, she came. When he locked the barn, she watched. When he cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table, she sat on the floor nearby, drawing circles in the dust. Are you mad? She asked suddenly. Jack looked down at her. At who? At me, she said. For falling. He crouched in front of her. No. She studied his face carefully. You're sad. Yes. Sad people don't like being needed, she said matter of fact. Jack felt the truth of that land squarely. Sometimes, he admitted. She nodded, satisfied. I won't let go. That night, headlights swept across the far ridge, just once. Enough to be real. Jack shut off every light in the house and moved Lily into the storm cellar beneath the barn, a space he had prepared years ago for emergencies that never came. He showed her how to stay quiet. She showed him she already knew. The SUV didn't approach. It lingered, then it vanished. Jack didn't chase it. He marked the direction, logged the time. Survival was patience. 2 days later, he found the mine. The entrance was half collapsed, the air stale and wrong. He didn't go in at first. He watched, listened. Then he heard Maria's voice, strained but unbroken, followed by a sound Jack recognized instantly, the dull impact of flesh meeting stone. Jack stepped into the light and raised the rifle. Richard Wright turned slowly, smiling as if he had expected this all along. He was well dressed for the wilderness, clean in a way that spoke of money and entitlement. His men shifted uneasily. You should have stayed out of this, Richard said. Jack didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He told them to leave, to walk away. Richard laughed, low and confident. Jack fired into the ceiling. Stone rained down. The message was clear. They retreated, dragging Mariah with them until Jack stepped forward again. That time, they let her go. Richard's eyes never left Jack's. This isn't over, he said calmly. It never is. Jack watched them disappear into the dark, then turned to Maria, who stood shaking but upright. He wrapped her ankle, lifted her without ceremony, and carried her back the way he had come. By the time they reached the ranch, Lily was waiting at the door. She ran straight into her mother's arms, crying silently. Jack stood back, giving them space, but Lily reached for him too, gripping his hand with fierce determination. She didn't let go. For a few days, the ranch felt like a pause the world had forgotten to interrupt. Maria's ankle was swollen but not broken, wrapped carefully and elevated on pillows Jack brought out without comment. Lily stayed close to her mother at first, then slowly widened her orbit, exploring the house, the barn, the wide, quiet land that seemed to stretch forever without corners to hide danger in. Jack watched all of it from a distance, measuring time in small details. The way Lily laughed when Ranger nudged her pocket for apples, the way Maria flinched at sudden sounds but forced herself to stand straight anyway, the way the house no longer felt like a place that echoed. Sheriff Tom Reynolds came the next morning. He took statements, photographed bruises, examined the tire tracks Jack had found near the tree line. He was careful with his words, but the meaning was plain. Richard Wright had money, lawyers, a talent for walking right up to the edge of the law and smiling as he leaned over it. A restraining order would help, eventually. Patrols could be increased. But protection, real protection, was thin out here. After the sheriff left, Maria sat at the kitchen table for a long time, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "He won't stop," she said finally. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was experience. "He doesn't need a reason, he just needs to win." Jack nodded. "Then we make it harder for him." That was how the unspoken agreement formed. Not with promises or declarations, but with action. Jack reinforced doors, checked sight lines, moved supplies into places only he knew. Maria learned the routines quickly, asking practical questions, listening carefully. Lily treated it like a game until Jack knelt in front of her and told her it wasn't one. She nodded, serious again, absorbing the truth without panic. At night, Jack sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the dark. Maria joined him once, limping slightly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Grief recognized grief. Silence didn't scare either of them anymore. Lily slept better after that, her nightmares fewer but sharper when they came. Jack heard her once, crying out softly, and found himself standing outside her door before he realized he had moved. He didn't go in. He waited. Mariah did. Jack listened to their voices fade back into calm, and something inside him loosened, just a fraction. 12 days passed, long enough to feel dangerous. The black SUV appeared at the edge of the property just before dusk. It didn't cross the boundary. It didn't need to. It sat there, engine idling, watching. Jack shut off the house lights one by one. Maria pulled Lily close. The vehicle stayed for 20 minutes, then drove away slowly, deliberately, as if confident it could return whenever it pleased. The next morning, Jack found the slashed tires. The morning after that, photographs left nailed to the fence. Old family pictures of Maria and Lily, marked with thick red X's. Sheriff Reynolds took them seriously, but seriousness did not equal speed. "He wants you afraid," the sheriff said. Jack shook his head. "He wants control." That night, Maria finally spoke about the past in full. About years of apologies followed by bruises. About the way Richard would isolate her, then accuse her of abandoning him. About how Lily learned to read his moods better than most adults. Jack listened without interruption, without judgment. When she finished, Maria wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, embarrassed by the tears. Jack said quietly, "He doesn't get to touch either of you again." The words were not a promise. They were a statement of intent. The attack came 3 nights later. Gunshots shattered the quiet just after midnight. Jack was already moving before the first echo died, shouting for Maria and Lily to run. He guided them through the hidden entrance behind the barn, into the old cave system that cut through the rock beneath the land. He watched them disappear into darkness before turning back, every sense sharpened. Richard came with 3 men, just as Jack expected. They moved fast, confident, lighting the barn on fire as a threat, not a mistake. Jack used the land the way he always had, drawing them apart, striking from angles they didn't see coming. The fight was brutal and close. 1 man fell, then another. The 3rd ran. Richard didn't. He laughed even as Jack knocked the gun from his hand. He talked about ownership, about family, about how men like Jack always thought they could fix what they didn't understand. Jack ended it quickly. When Sheriff Reynolds arrived with backup, Richard Wright was bleeding and screaming and finally restrained. The barn burned through the night. At dawn, Maria and Lily emerged from the cave, eyes wide at the damage. Lily clutched Jack's hand so tightly it hurt. He didn't pull away. The shelter had become a target, but it had held, and that changed everything. The night did not announce itself as the last. It arrived the way danger often does, quietly, with a sense of inevitability that settled into the bones before the mind could name it. Jack felt it while the land was still, while Ranger stamped once in the barn and went silent again, while the wind shifted and carried a smell that didn't belong. Gasoline. Smoke waiting to be born. The first shot cracked through the dark just after midnight, sharp and final, tearing the stillness open. Jack was already on his feet, rifle in hand, moving with the reflexes of a man who had rehearsed this moment without ever admitting it would come. He crossed the room in 3 strides, threw the back door open, and saw the glow licking the edge of the barn. Fire, controlled, intentional. "Now," he said, his voice low but unbreakable. Maria didn't hesitate. She scooped Lily up, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and ran. Jack guided them to the hidden entrance behind the hayshed, pulling the brush aside and ushering them into the narrow mouth of the cave. He knelt in front of Lily, cupped her face with both hands, and forced her to meet his eyes. "No matter what you hear," he said, "you stay with your mom. You don't come back out. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, tears spilling but silent. She reached for him, fingers locking into his jacket. Jack pried them loose gently. "I'll find you," he said. It was the only promise he allowed himself. Then he closed the entrance and turned toward the fire. Richard Wright stood near the barn, flames reflecting in his eyes like something alive and pleased. 2 men flanked him, rifles raised, their confidence rooted in numbers and fear. Jack took the long way around, using the slope and the shadows, letting the land swallow him until he was close enough to see Richard's smile clearly. "Thought you could hide them," Richard called out. "Thought you were special." Jack fired first. 1 man went down hard, the sound cut short. The second swung toward the noise, too slow. Jack moved again, circling, the night bending to his advantage. Gunfire ripped through the dark, deafening and wild, bullets tearing into wood and dirt. Jack felt a burning line graze his shoulder, ignored it, pressed forward. The 3rd man ran. Jack let him go. Richard didn't move. He stood there as the barn burned hotter, the fire climbing, crackling, devouring everything Jack had built with his hands. Horses screamed inside, trapped. Jack's breath hitched. He could still reach them. He knew the timing. He could save them. Richard saw the calculation and smiled wider. "Choose," he said. "That's what men like you do, right? Choose who lives." Jack's jaw clenched. He lowered the rifle for half a second, just long enough to grab the rope hanging by the fence and cut loose the side gate. The horses burst free in a thunder of panic and muscle, racing past him into the dark. Jack turned back just as Richard raised his gun. They collided in the dirt, the impact knocking the air from both of them. The fight was ugly, close, stripped of distance and control. Richard swung wildly, fueled by rage and entitlement, shouting about family and obedience and the things he believed were owed to him. Jack absorbed the blows, gave some back, his movements precise, restrained, lethal when they needed to be. Richard reached for a knife. Jack caught his wrist, twisted, felt bone give. Richard screamed. Jack drove him into the ground and held him there, the fire roaring beside them, the heat pressing in. The night alive with sirens approaching too late and right on time. "You don't own them," Jack said, his voice steady. "You never did." He stepped back as Sheriff Reynolds' truck skidded to a stop, red and blue lights tearing across the smoke. Deputies poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. Richard lay bleeding, broken, still shouting until the cuffs snapped closed around his wrists and the words turned into incoherent noise. The barn burned down to embers before dawn. When it was over, Jack sat on the ground with his back against a fence post, blood drying on his sleeve, exhaustion settling into him like a weight he welcomed. Maria emerged from the cave as the sky lightened, Lily at her side. They stopped when they saw the ruins, the blackened beams, the ash drifting through the air. Lily broke free and ran to him. She threw herself into his arms, crying openly now, her small body shaking. Jack held her, felt the fragile strength of her grip, and knew with absolute clarity that whatever came next, this was no longer a choice he could undo. Maria knelt beside them, her hand resting on Jack's shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The worst thing had happened, and they were still standing. As the sun rose over the Montana hills, pale and indifferent, the land revealed what remained. Scars, loss, and something harder to destroy than fear. They had survived the night. Morning came slowly after the fire, pale and uncertain. as if the land itself needed time to understand what had been taken and what had been spared. The barn was gone, reduced to a skeleton of blackened beams and damp ash, the smell of smoke clinging to everything. Jack stood where it had been, hands resting on his hips, eyes hollow but clear. He felt the loss, sharp and immediate, but it did not hollow him out the way loss once had. This time, something remained. Richard Wright was taken away before noon, cuffed, silent now, his confidence finally stripped down to something small and frightened. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stayed behind, long enough to explain what would come next. Charges stacked high enough to keep Richard from ever walking free again. Statements to be signed, testimony to be given. Maria listened closely, her posture straight, Lily's hand tucked into hers. When Reynolds asked if she was willing to testify, Maria answered without hesitation, yes. The word carried weight. It was the sound of a door closing for good. The community arrived in pieces, a neighbor with spare lumber, another with tools. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought quiet respect and left it where it was needed. No one asked questions Jack wasn't ready to answer. No one treated Maria like something broken. They worked, they stayed. They helped rebuild what the fire had taken, not because it was a barn, but because it was a stand. Jack moved through the days with a steadiness he hadn't felt in years. His shoulder healed slowly. The nights were still restless, but they no longer belonged to him alone. Lily slept through most of them now, curled against Maria, safe enough to dream without waking afraid. Sometimes Jack sat outside her door anyway, listening, just in case. The trial came faster than Maria expected. Richard's money bought him lawyers, but it couldn't erase the evidence, the witnesses, the pattern too clear to deny. Maria stood in court and told the truth in a voice that did not shake. Lily was spared the room, spared the sight of her father shrinking into something she no longer needed to understand. When the verdict was read, guilty on every count, Maria closed her eyes, not in relief, but in release. They returned to the ranch changed, not healed, not untouched, but no longer hunted. Winter came early that year. Snow settled over the land, softening the scars, covering the ash. The new barn rose slower than the old one had fallen, each beam placed with intention. Lily insisted on helping, her small hands carrying nails, her laughter ringing out when Ranger nudged her for attention. She talked about chickens, about a garden in the spring, about school, normal things. Jack listened and said yes more often than he ever had before. One evening, as the fire crackled inside the house, Maria spoke the words they had both been circling. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly, "but I know what it isn't." "It isn't fear," Jack nodded. He didn't reach for her right away. When he did, it was careful, honest. Love came differently this time. Slower, built on trust instead of hope alone. It did not erase the past. It stood beside it. They married in the spring, beneath a sky wide enough to hold everything they had lost and everything they were becoming. There was no grand ceremony, just witnesses, just truth. Lily stood between them, beaming, her hand in Jack's, hers in Maria's, as if she had always known where she belonged. Life settled into something steady, not perfect, real. Maria laughed more. Jack slept deeper. Lily grew taller, louder, confident in a way children only are when the ground beneath them does not move. When Maria told Jack she was pregnant, he said nothing at first. He just held her, breathing, letting the future arrive without flinching. Years later, they returned to the place where it had begun. The abandoned well was sealed now, the land reclaimed. They spread a blanket nearby, ate quietly, watched the horizon stretch. Lily leaned against Jack's shoulder, older, stronger, still holding on. Jack looked out at the wilderness, at the life he had almost refused. He did not think about what he had buried. He thought about what he had chosen, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The land remembers everything. It remembers fire and silence, fear and footsteps. The way grief once settled into Jack Turner's bones and refused to leave. But it also remembers what followed. The quiet mornings, the sound of laughter drifting across open fields. The slow work of rebuilding, not just wood and stone, but trust. Jack sometimes stands at the edge of the property at dusk, the sky fading into something soft and forgiving. Maria joins him, her hand finding his without effort. Lily trails behind, always watching, always certain they will wait. The past is still there, woven into them, but it no longer leads. It follows. Love did not arrive loudly. It did not erase scars or promise safety forever. It simply stayed, day after day, choice after choice. Some nights, when the wind moves just right through the trees, Jack thinks he hears echoes of the man he used to be. He lets them pass. He looks at what stands beside him now instead. A family not born of blood alone, but of courage, refusal, and grace. The fire took much. It did not take this. End of article.